Hello and good evening. I'm Byron White, Vice President for University Engagement and the Chief Diversity Officer at Cleveland State University. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this special City Club of Cleveland Forum here at Cleveland State. We're very proud of our partnership with the City Club, which for more than a century has been providing a forum for the frank and vibrant discussion of the most important issues we face in our community. This is the role, too, for our great university. We're a place that celebrates freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry, that honors great ideas by listening closely and asking questions, that embodies a spirit of engaged learning, connecting students directly to the community, and bringing the community in to work alongside students and faculty toward the common goal of strengthening our community. I also want to thank our partners at IdeaStream who are recording tonight's program. The spirit of engagement and community building animates that public media organization as well, and we're very grateful. Lastly, too, thanks to our partners at A Cultural Exchange for selling books this evening. Now, for our formal introduction of tonight's speaker, I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to a very talented undergraduate student here at Cleveland State, who truly is shaping the future of our community, Mr. Michael Wilson. Mike, that's fine. Michael is a junior majoring in accounting here. He is a student navigator in our Office of Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement and the treasurer of the student organization Culture in Action. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. White. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. Most of you are here today, I think, because you know the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates. You've perhaps read Between the World and Me, or A Beautiful Struggle, or you've been reading The Atlantic for years. I myself am here today to support the movement for social equality here in our country. And as a young African-American man, I am proud to live in a community and attend a university that recognizes the importance of highlighting such an event. In the past few years, Mr. Coates has focused his work on national issues that are at the crux of challenges that we face here in Cleveland and the legacies of historic injustices committed against African American communities. Last summer, he wrote an essay for The Atlantic, which made the case for reparations. He spoke on that topic at the City Club event a little more than a year ago, and he challenged our community to recognize that structural racism didn't somehow end with the Civil War or after Jim Crow. He argued that those structures evolved to systematically remove wealth from African American neighborhoods in patterns that continue today. Mr. Coates has continued to push this now national conversation through a number of works, including his book, Between the World and Me, and a recent Atlantic essay on the effects of mass incarceration and countless blog posts and media appearances. He contextualizes the overwhelming facts of structural poverty, crime and incarceration rates, police violence against African American communities, and the many challenges our nation faces, some of which it has created for itself. Ta-Nehisi Coates will be interviewed this evening by City Club CEO Dan Moulthrop. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming author and national correspondent for The Atlantic magazine, Ta-Nehisi Coates, in conversation with Dan Moulthrop.
Thank you. No, sit down, please sit down. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Let's go.
That'd be good.
Does that happen all the time now?
No comment.
Congratulations. Last year, you were here for, as Michael said, Michael, thanks for that great introduction. You were here for, right after you published the essay, The Case for Reparations, which was in itself huge. And then you went on to just have a really, really much larger year. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Apparently, is there, I don't know if we mentioned Genius in the intro or not, but that's a pretty big deal.
It's a big deal.
It is.
It's
Well,
a big
yeah.
deal.
Can you tell the story of when you started to write Between the World and Me? As I understand it, you didn't start out to write Between the World and Me. Your editor was expecting a different piece of work.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, I got signed to a book contract in 2009, and I think the book was supposed to be about the Civil War. That didn't quite work out. I mean, this is how it happens with books, you know. As it happened, I had been writing about the Civil War quite a bit for The Atlantic. A great deal of my creative energy, I felt, had already gone into the magazine and, you know, into the blog. and so I didn't feel like I had, like, a book that was in my heart. I mean, I could have written a book, but I don't think it would have been very good. I just didn't have it. I would have been faking it. And then as it happened, many years ago, I had a friend of mine who had been killed by a police officer. And I think about my friend every day. And we were entering into this season in which, you know, it seemed like every day you were cutting on the TV and there was some police officer doing, you know, some sort of act of violence towards some African-American person. And the country was sort of reacting with a kind of surprise and shock, but it wasn't surprising or shocking to me. And I thought I might revisit that, you know, and I wanted to do it in a form that was, you know, rather brief. I wanted it to be readable. You know, ideally, I wanted somebody to be able to digest the whole thing in one sitting. But at the same time, I wanted it to be heavy and emotionally weighty. I wanted it to be the sort of thing that, you know, you thought about, you know, for weeks after you read it. But it should be quick and, you know, easily digestible. And so after I finished The Case for Reparations, you know, I had all of this with me. And, you know, my basic notion of if you're trying to understand white supremacy in this country is the kind of spectacular things you see, like, say, Eric Garner being choked to death, or Tamir Rice, you know, the police effectively pulling a drive-by, you know, on a 12-year-old boy. As horrifying as that is, that actually is just literally the tip of the iceberg. And my job as a journalist is to map and discover everything that's underneath the water. Because that's what we don't see, that's what we, you know, don't pay attention to. We have a case right now, or we had a case, I guess we don't have anymore, we had a case just last week, you know, where an officer in a town in South Carolina pulled a young girl out of a chair, threw her across the room, flipped the desk, threw her across the room. And everybody is rightly horrified at the video of this officer assaulting this young girl. But when I talk about white supremacy in this country, I always make the case that if you are beginning with the video, you've missed like 5 steps that happened before that. Why is there an officer in the school in the first place? Why is there a law on the books in South Carolina for disrupting schools? Why is that a law? Why is that a criminal offense? See, when you've gotten to that level, several things have gone wrong before the officer actually did what the officer did. If you call a police officer into a situation like that, if you call the criminal justice system, because that's what you're doing, into a system like that, you are calling for the hammers. And the hammers are going to do what the hammers do. The question is, why is it with black people, when we have this myriad of problems, why are we always calling for the hammers in situations when, for other people, We have the great, disparate social service, network that we use. There was a piece just in the New York Times a couple days ago talking about how heroin is expanding in white communities and how, as opposed to the kind of response that we had to crack cocaine in the 1980s, we're having a very, very different response to this heroin scare among middle-class white people. The job of Between the World and Me really is to map out how it feels to live as an individual under that sort of weight, under those sorts of responses, and to do it in a really punchy way, in a way that you feel it, but in a digestible way also.
It's also, you're bringing back the spirit of James Baldwin. Can you talk about Baldwin's influence on your writing?
Well, I don't know that Baldwin ever left. It'd be too much for me to claim credit to bring him back, because I think, at least for those of us who, are writers, and those of us who believe in the essay as a real form. I mean, Baldwin is, to my mind, the greatest essayist of the 20th century, greatest American essayist of the 20th century, and so, far be it from me to bring him back, but certainly I took inspiration, from James Baldwin, and the basic story is this: I read The Fire Next Time as a young man. I was about 19 years old, sitting in the library at my college at Howard University. And I read it in one sitting, in much the same way that I imagine someone reading Between the World and Me in one sitting. And I didn't understand everything I was reading, but I was incredibly affected, like deeply, deeply moved emotionally. And I, came back and read the book, some 20 years later, a couple of years ago. And then I got everything. And when I got everything, and I could feel like the beauty of the writing, I just wondered why there weren't books like that today, why people didn't write with that kind of force today. Now, one reason why people don't write with that kind of force is because James Baldwin is James Baldwin. It's not going to be another one. But you could at least try. You can make an effort. And Between the World and Me is an effort.
You wrote it to your son as a letter to your son, which then becomes, in a lot of ways, a letter to every young African-American male in this nation. How have young men who are the same age as your son, what's been the feedback that you've gotten from them?
I don't know, because see, what happened was the book came out, and I'm boxed off in two ways. The first thing is, whereas most people will encounter Between the World and Me as a finished product, I remember it as a mess. and I remember all the drafts, and I remember everything that went wrong, and I can see everything that is not quite what I wanted it to be. And so it's very hard for me to get to other people's perception of the book, because my feeling for it is so different. I think the other thing is as a writer, I don't know, I try not to think about it too much, because I don't want it influencing me. I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm almost supposed to be somewhat blind, although I'm not completely, to the response of other people.
How did you know the book was done, given how much, you said you remembered it as a mess. Did your editor say, oh yeah, now we're here?
My editor, I didn't know it was done. I didn't, by the time we got to that point, I didn't really have the capacity to know it was done. Mm-hmm. So.
Is it the same, is your process the same with your larger essays for The Atlantic?
No, I usually know when those are done.
Uh-huh.
But this was such it was, so when you write an essay, or a piece like that for The Atlantic, there's some sort of overarching narrative that you have. There's some sort of point that that you're driving at. But Between the World and Me is like a work of art, and I don't mean that in the pretentious, I'm an artiste sort of way. Literally, it was just okay, I have a feeling right now, and I want to express it, but I don't know what it is. I don't know where it goes. I don't have it, fully baked. Whereas by the time, when I'm doing journalism, by the time I sit down to write, I know what I'm trying to say, and I know what it is. I have a very, very firm handle on the material. I didn't have it with this.
Has the success of this book surprised you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most writing fails. Commercially, it just fails. And most of my writing over the course of my career has failed commercially. That is the nature of the beast of being a writer. That's who you are. Success is not, the norm. And so what you have to do if you're going to write is you have to write into the wind. You have to, basically say, or write against the wind. Because what you say is, listen, I'm prepared to do this, and I'm prepared to give my all, even if only like 20 people actually buy the book. Mm-hmm. And you have to write in that sort of way. Mm-hmm. And so it's so much of a task to get yourself together, to gird yourself for the failure, that the expectation of any success, the expectation that all you folks would be here is, I couldn't have imagined that a year ago. No.
What did you think was going to happen? I mean, you knew you were onto something with the
No, I didn't know I was on anything.
Really?
No, how can you? I'm serious. This is not false modesty. It's hard to do this. It's really hard. And this is what I mean about like there's a window. It's like through the looking glass. And you guys as readers are over here.
Right. Because
you see the finished thing. But I'm over here and I see everything else. You know what it's like? I think I can get this across really well. It's like if you've raised a kid, and the kid, 25, 30 years old, becomes an upstanding citizen. People are really proud of that kid, really, really successful. But if you're the parent of that kid, it don't look like that. It looks very different. And that doesn't mean you're not proud of the kid. That doesn't mean you're not happy for it. But see, you remember everything that went wrong.
Are you talking about your relationship with your son, or are you talking about your dad's relationship with you?
It's with any relationship with any parent. I think that's just the nature of parenting. And writing is much the same way. All the times when you were like, I think I failed, or I think this isn't quite going how it was supposed to go. And so people encounter this book like it's the finished kid. The kid then graduated from college, is off in law school somewhere, and I don't know, dating a nice young lady or whatever you want your kid to do, dating a nice young man, whatever, and they say, good God, what an upstanding child. And you just say, you guys have no idea. So it's tough. It's very, very, it's tough if you're in the act of creating. It's very, very hard for people who just come across it and think it just sort of, appeared, like it just manifested.
Well, let me ask you this then. What do you think it means that it has been so popular, that it has caught fire, that it has become this book that
I don't know.
Everybody needs to read
I
right
don't
now?
know. I'm mystified by it. I don't.
Really?
Again, how could I know? Because I'm inside. I'm here. I'm in a different position. I actually can't. I can't. To understand that would require someone who was out in the world, encountered it fresh, and was able to look at the world with fresh eyes. But I don't really have that. My head has been here for a year and a half. I've lost my ability to see the book straight, and to it's the reason why writers don't review their own books. It's among other reasons. That's for a critic to say. And I don't mean that in any sort of derisive way. That is the actual role of critics.
Yeah.
That to say, okay, here's why this is what was going on at the time, and here's why it's connected. But I don't know. And I kind of don't want to know because
really,
well, because it can be deeply corrupting, and you end up not writing from the heart. And you say, oh wow, maybe I can duplicate that again if I do. And see that first of all, you can't duplicate it again. It's very, very seductive, but it leads you to writing bad books. So.
Well, I don't want you to write bad books, but I do want to honor the fact that you have given voice to something that it seems that I can tell in our community here in Cleveland that people want to grapple with in ways that they haven't been ready to grapple with before. I think there was a piece on the Daily Beast the other day. Why do white people like Ta-Nehisi Coates' book? And it was interesting to read that piece, and I thought okay, well, why do I like it? And I think because of its honesty and its willingness to pull up from the very ugliest parts of our history, to raise them up so that we look at them and we see them from every side, and we understand their implications and the way that they're connected to the violence that we're experiencing in our communities today. That's why I think it's caught fire. That's why I think it's been so successful. You can tell me I'm full of it if you want, but
Well, isn't the problem with that Aren't other black writers honest too?
Well, sure. I mean, like Tony. I mean, yes, and there are other black writers that are successful, and then there are a lot of black writers that aren't successful. And at some
But
point,
is honesty the barrier? Like, is honesty the difference between those who are successful and those who are not?
no. I mean, a lot of this has to do. If I were very cynical, I would say that a lot of it has to do with timing and luck.
Well, that's what my publisher thought. That's why they released it early. So,
They really pushed
so
it out.
I actually favor the timing and luck explanation. I think that's probably the most.
There's a small amount of talent, perhaps.
Yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of talented people. No, I mean this. There are many, there are many talented writers in the world. They don't all get this.
No, but yeah, I mean, you have honed your craft, though, through your journalism, through your work in magazines, and your craft isn't just, you're not just a writer of books.
Right.
You are an engager. You have this tradition of engaging with your readership, and that's different than a lot of writers who sort of just issue books and then disappear.
That's true. That's true.
You described earlier. You described your job is to map and discover, and I want you to talk more about what you're mapping and discovering, like where you see this. This book participates in this sort of national conversation, and I put that in quotes because it's become cliche and sort of empty. But where are we now?
There was a piece I read, Between the World and Me ends on a note, like just a sort of nod towards climate change. And it ends on that nod because I suspect that the things that we don't want to know about the relationship between communities that we have called black and communities we have called white in this country is actually tied to something much, much deeper and certainly more American and probably something human. So I was reading this piece in the New Yorker, and it was about basically how the entire Pacific Northwest of the United States is doomed. It is due for a massive earthquake and tsunami. It's a great piece by this woman, Catherine Schultz. Y'all should go read it. The science is incredible. And there's a moment in the piece where, like, they have an inundation zone. And the idea is that, you shouldn't build below the inundation zone because the tsunami will come. We don't know when it's going to come, but it's clear it's going to come. We got the science. It's going to come. People build in the inundation zone anyway. They just do it. I mean, they consult about it. They just, they live as though this is not going to happen. And I think, like, what's in that is an inability to sufficiently invest in outcomes beyond your natural lifespan. Now, this is actually the problem of white supremacy in our culture, too. Country was founded, and we had this Constitution, and the Founding Fathers understood that slavery was a problem. They knew it. They knew it. No one, who, was serious about what was going on would have been shocked by the Civil War. Certainly Jefferson was not. I mean, Jefferson literally said, this is like a fire bell in the night. He understood it. They kicked the can down the road. Some 600,000, 700,000, 800,000. I'm saying that because they keep raising the number of folks died during the Civil War. First modern war, great destruction. You have just tremendous difficulty, imagining. I think it's like 20% of military-age Southern white men are killed during the Civil War. It's just a massive kind of carnage that really the world had not seen on that level, because this is the first time you get modern weaponry really in a war on a mass level like that, and would not be repeated again until, World War I. Why'd they kick the can down the road? Like, if they knew this was a problem, maybe they couldn't see it in the entire outlines of what was going to happen, but they knew that this was a real problem that could potentially lead to great bloodshed, and they kicked the can down the road anyway. And then at the end of the Civil War, we made a decision, once again, we tried Reconstruction for a few years, but basically made a decision to kick the can down the road again. And what you got was the longest and most lethal domestic terrorist campaign in American history. At times endorsed by the American state, by the way. I'm talking people like Senator Ben Pitchfork Tillman justifying lynching on the Senate floor. I mean, this happened. This happened. I'm not making this up, Films like Birth of a Nation being shown in the White House. I mean, that's how deep into it we were. But we kicked the can again. And, there's a strong argument that even after the civil rights movement, we did not go quite as far as we should have gone. That we outlawed certain treatment, but we did not take account, and this is what I came, last year to talk about, we did not take account for what 250, 350 years of plunder and piracy had actually done to African American communities. Kick the can down the road. Why? But see, if you go back to the climate change piece, there's nothing about having blonde hair and blue eyes that makes you kick the can down the road. It's much more profound than that, actually. There's a power issue. There's something within the human spirit, or something within our, inability, to see. And I don't want to talk about it in those types of terms because I don't want to make it sound like this is unalterable, like we can't build a different reality. But certainly the reality we've constructed right now is really, really limited in its ability to see. That is the problem more than anything that really, I find myself grappling with. Now, I grapple with it from the perspective of, race and racism in this country. I do that because I think you could not pick a more profound, a more informative angle to understand and to examine this era, and I'm talking about the past 500 years of modernism, of the Enlightenment, of these great sort of rights of man that we say people should have. I don't think you could pick a better angle than to come to an Enlightenment republic, an alleged Enlightenment republic, and examine those rights from the perspective of those who've been left outside of them. I think that's a great angle to understand the problem, but the question is actually a profoundly deep, and human one. And, I'm just, because if you can understand that, like if you can get to why, because this is a lethal problem, actually. I mean, I actually think this is like a big, big problem for us. If you can get to the why, then maybe you can begin to think about solutions and what can be done.
Do you get to the why? I mean, is that sort of what you're after right now, getting to the why?
Yeah. And also just seeing it in all of its, depth and, so like, the case for reparations, I mean, it was an argument for reparations. I stand by that. I'm very serious about it. But it actually was an attempt to understand, like, why we would design a housing policy in this country, why we would erect a middle class in this country the way we did, knowing full well, because people were saying it at the time, not late at the time, that this was going to cause problems 50 years later, that this would cause problems. Why would we, in some of my more recent work, create, a carceral state? Like we have, knowing full well that we have a long, long history of criminalizing black people in this country, and then be surprised, when the carceral state looks like it's a kind of like intentional blindness or something that's going on there.
Right now there's this surprising bipartisan interest in ending the carceral state,
right.
But it seems to, you've written that the way that people are approaching this suggests that once we do this, if we can just get some people out of prison, we'll be fine.
I hate being this guy. I really do. It's just, it's not even close to enough. Right. I mean, so let me say that it's good. Right. It's good to at least be moving in this direction as opposed to the direction of super predators. Which is where we were moving when I was, a young man coming up. It's good to be moving in the opposite direction. I'm happy about that. But see, what you have to understand is like the prison population in this country increased fivefold from 1970 to like 2000, 5 times over, okay? To get back to where we were in 1970, which is roughly between 100 and 200 prisoners per 100,000 in the population of the country. And that's about roughly where the Western world is as a whole. To get back to that, we have to somehow find a way to cut our population by 80%. 80%. 80%. So 80%, you have to find some way to do that. Now here's the thing. There was a bipartisan bill. It was recently passed. Very, very good. Happy to see that. I don't have anything bad to say about that. But it only applies to the federal system. And the vast majority of prisons in this country are not in the federal system. Now, it's a good nod. It's a good thing. I'm certainly not against the bill. But this is a baby step. Mm-hmm. I mean, it should be clarified. And here's the problem. And I write about this in the piece. While the level of incarceration in this country is new, the actual discrepancy between black-white incarceration is not. Right. So if you went to the northern cities, for instance, at, say in 1910, 1920, the ratio of black to white in terms of incarceration in our northern cities would have been about 7-1. That's about what the ratio is right now. So what it says is, even if you dialed back to that, if you could cut that 80% and get down to 20%, black people in this country would likely still bear the same brunt, not the same brunt, but would still bear a disproportionate brunt of the system. And so, how do you get to that? I mean, how do you do that? How do you design a legitimately fair system? And see, one of the things that I argue in the piece is it's very, very difficult to do it strictly from the perspective of carceral reform, because the reason why we have that is tied up into like 5 other systems.
Right.
It's
Poverty.
the reason why there's a police officer in the school, for instance. Like, you have to like ask questions like that. Like, why does the school look the way it is?
Right.
Why are black people living where they're living? Why do we have investment? Like, you would have to like do something, an analysis that goes way beyond, or we just need to change the laws.
Right. There was a moment in time when I volunteered one day a week at a public defender's office in New York City, and I was struck by the fact that it wasn't that people were being unjustly charged, it was that they were guilty of really petty crimes, of a series of really petty crimes, and it was a whole system, it was a much larger system.
Right.
There's a lot of white people reading your book. I'm just one of them.
Thank you. Happy about that.
And this question comes up, like, when it comes to dismantling white supremacy and structural racism and these systems that we're talking about, what should white people do?
Well, I think the message of the book, in fact, is that it is not for black people to tell white people what to do. That's part of the burden. That's part of it. And so like a first step is to not ask black people, what should I do? That's the first step. And I mean that because, and obviously no offense to you specifically, I mean, you're asking the general question. But the fact of the matter is, you then are then throwing it back, on me to then go and figure out a problem that in fact you caused. Do you know what I mean? Like that. And I don't mean, obviously, again, I don't mean literally you.
I got it.
Specifically.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
No, but I don't mean it that way. I mean that it's like, if I have my foot on someone's neck and I say to you, how do I get my foot off of your neck? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Well, you have the foot on their neck, right? Like, you're doing it. And I understand, like, what you're talking about is in terms of a collective society. Right. That's bigger than what one individual person can do. But I really believe that the first step is for folks to start searching and looking on their own. I guess if I were white, and see, now I'm going to answer the question. Probably the first thing I would do is be really quiet and read a lot. I probably would read a ton. And I wouldn't tell anybody I was reading. I wouldn't go up to my black friends and say, hey, I read this book, Between the World and Me, have you seen this? I wouldn't do that. I would just read a ton, and I would study, and I probably wouldn't say anything.
I'm not going to ask you what books, because you've already said that. It's on the web. You can Google it. Ta-Nehisi Coates' reading list.
But I probably spend a lot of time searching,
Uh-huh. Your dad spent a lot of time publishing lost works. And I know he spent a lot of time pushing some of those lost works on you.
Right.
Were there any among those that you find yourself coming back to these days?
Not so much. You know what it is? The fact that my dad published those books was more of a reflection of like a kind of book culture in the house as a whole. So there were the books my dad published, but then there were the books he collected, and it was more the environment. Like, I can't even think of like specific books in that household that I come back to, but it was the practice of constantly reading. And the idea that reading was a good thing, and books were a good thing, and that books were, a tool for liberation, and that you should engage in them. That was probably the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm. It's time to get to questions from the audience.
Okay.
So there are 2 microphones set up in the aisles, and if you have a question, please find your way over to either one of them, and we'll get to them. And if nobody goes, then I have to ask more dumb questions, like what should white people do? But I do have a question we can start with, which has to do. No, we got a question. We got questions. Let's go. First question from the audience. Go.
Good evening. So we were talking earlier about these systems that connect with other systems and trying to kind of untangle them. But what if it's a sort of kind of practice of how Americans practice capitalism? Because it seems like that's the overarching system that generates all these prisons and cotton fields and all the rest of this stuff. So what are your comments on sort of capitalism writ large?
Well, I don't know that that works. Certainly, the Soviet Union had a gulag system. I mean, that's like the closest thing that's analogous to what we have here. The Soviet Union certainly exploited the hell, out of its satellite states in Eastern Europe. The desire to take things from other people and use them for yourself does not begin with modern capitalism. It's not like, medieval Europe was a fair system in which goods were evenly distributed. One might make a case for, better efficiency or something like that, in terms of but I find that very hard to accept, because there's so many other cases, you can point to other, easily pre-capitalist models where people are doing the same thing, so I don't think that quite gets us there.
Let's go over here.
Good evening. Thank you for coming back to Cleveland. So I have a question. When you write, you talk about people who think they are white. Mm-hmm. And I just heard you say, and people who think that they are black. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about that use of language?
Sure.
And what that means for you?
Sure. Well, I think I said this the last time I was here. It's very, very important to understand that there is no consistent standard for what it means to be black or what it means to be white. It just isn't. Any African American who has gone to their family reunion understands that there are a breadth of people who look all kinds of ways. And this really doesn't have anything, to like, you can't match that to like the amount of soul they have, for instance. You know what I mean? There's no, real way to like say, these people racially, constitute a pure group. And we know this. We know that if some of us were in, say, Louisiana 200 years ago, some of us who consider ourselves black would not be considered black racially. We know that to be true. We know that if some of us who went to Brazil, a great deal of us, in fact, who went to Brazil right now and talked about how black we were, would have to check something different because they got like 200 different quote-unquote racial categories. We know the same thing holds true for white people. We know that the history of Irish immigrants into this country, Italian immigrants into this country, Jewish immigrants into this country from Eastern Europe is not a history of the country immediately throwing open its arms and welcoming them into the white race. That's not the history. I mean, there's a long, for instance, history of discrimination against Irish, depicting them in, with these kind of simian features. It's actually very, very similar to how black people are depicted. So there's no real consistent notion of race across time and geography. You can't, transmit it in different countries, and you can't transmit it into different times. See, the thing is, any definition of race always depends upon power. And there's no way to get away from that. The reason why you go to your family reunion and we look all kinds of ways is because in Virginia, at a certain point in the 17th century, somebody sat down and came up with something called the one-drop rule. And they did not come up with the one-drop rule because they thought it was just a cool idea. They came up with the one-drop rule because they were trying to figure out how many people can I plunder to the maximum level. What's the most amount of people I can plunder? Now this poses us actually with a couple of problems. So for black people, for any sort of notion of a black race and a white race, that immediately goes out the door. But it poses us with a couple of big problems. The idea of a black race in America is not based on any notion of purity. So you could see, for instance, first president of Howard University, and if I showed you a picture of him right now, the first black president of Howard University, you would say he was a white man. That's what he would look like. But he wasn't. He was a Southern black preacher. Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, very famous, If I showed you Charlie Patton, one of the earlier innovators of the blues, and I didn't tell you who he was, you might look at him and say he's a white man. But he's not. At least not by our definition of what black is. Whiteness is different. The white race, as a construction, is based on the idea of purity. That's the other side of the one-drop rule. And so the whole basis of it is fencing people out, keeping out, preserving purity in a way that, black people in this country have never really been faced with. The second problem is from that, whereas black people have a secondary identity after race. There's an ethnic identity, there's a cultural identity, there's music that draws black people together, there's a language, a way of speaking, an accent, practices, certain foods that we enjoy. Not calling anybody out. that would still be there, even if our racial identity went away. So if the census went away today, or if white supremacy, better yet, if white supremacy went away today and we were all suddenly equal, there would still be black people. Because there still would be a culture, a heritage, a unified thing that is not based on fencing people out necessarily. The same can't be said for white people. Now, there are cultural and ethnic identities that exist under, an umbrella of whiteness. For instance, maybe, you being Irish American is really, really important to you, right? But see, even those kind of European identities are breaking down. I can go, when I was in France, for instance, I've met people, black people who've been there, for 2-3 generations, consider themselves French, quote unquote black people we call black today. And if they came over here today, the country that they would hail from would be French. That would be their cultural identity, because that's where they're from. Now, they might recognize some broader diasporic identity, but they would be French. The thing is, for white people in this country, and this is like the tremendous barrier, it's a tremendous barrier, to get anywhere, it involves not just the overthrow of white supremacy, it involves the destruction of the idea of whiteness as a concept. Now, it also involves the destruction racially of blackness as a concept, but see, we would gladly give that up. We would let that go in a second, because see, all it means for us is people discriminating against us. That's what it means for us racially. And we would keep all the culture and all the ethnicity, and we would have our little parties and, do our little dances and, still have our fun. You know what I mean? But see, white people don't have that same sort of thing, or people who, the idea of whiteness is important to them don't have that same fallback. It's power. And so if you lose your name, if you lose that belief, and that was why I used that formulation to, reify the notion, it's a belief, it's a concept, it's a priority. It is not a genetic thing. It is not, handed down, by God or anything like that. It is nothing but power. And to give up whiteness, to give up that belief is to give up power. It can't be separated. And that's like the huge, huge barrier, I think, in this country.
Hi, my name is Philip Hidiatnia, and I'm the chair of the City Club's Youth Forum Council. And so I was there when you came to the City Club last year. And first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming back. I know it's certainly on everyone's mind in this room. We're really lucky to have you. The question that I wanted to ask was regarding kind of literature and culture and the nature of it today. Speaking as somebody who's grown up in kind of this new generation as a high school student, especially given that much of your work, from your book to your long-form articles in The Atlantic, has been longer writing. And we're kind of seeing, I guess, people in my generation straying away from that. They want to skim across the surface. They don't want to delve into those issues. They just want the synopsis. How do you think that impacts the conversations that we have in America about race and other subjects? And do you think that there are benefits to that move, or do you think that we're losing a lot of meaning along the way?
Well, I don't know. I'm not convinced that young people today read. I don't know that. I appreciate the self-critique, but I don't know if I believe it. Certainly, the history of racism in this country does not lend itself to the belief that previous generations were more willing to endure long and nuanced arguments. You know, it just doesn't. It just doesn't. And so I have to question the premise. You know, I really do. Certainly, things are changing. You know, some things need to be short. You know, some things that I might believe. I mean, this is a short book, actually. It actually is a short book. You know, it's only 150 pages. It needed to be, you know, short. But it wasn't short because I thought young people didn't have, you know, attention spans to deal with long books. It was short because in being short, I thought like it could deliver a kind of punch, you know, in a particular way. So I don't know, man. I'm not so clear on that. You know, I know there are a number of young people who come up to me who've read, you know, my long form stuff. So I know people say that. I know it's out there. What you're saying is not crazy. I just don't know that I agree with it.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
As I think a white man in this society, I more disproportionately encounter people that would look to discredit or deny the truth or just not choose to believe that what you have to say is true or is the history. And it more and more becomes, it seems like they may be a lost cause. And I'm just wondering if you believe that that's true, or if not, how you might reach those type of people.
Well, you know, as a writer, those questions are not particularly relevant to me. For other people in other situations, I think they're relevant, but look, I have to do what I have to do. You know, I made a decision some years ago to observe the world, to report on the world, to research the world, and to speak as honestly and truthfully and as candidly as I could. That's my responsibility. On a moral level, what I hope is to be able to, you know, get out of bed in the morning, go to work, do what I do, look myself in the mirror at night, and feel like I was not part of that group of people who was trying to push the planet off the edge. And my way of doing that is writing as candidly and openly and as honestly as I can. I can't make people decide they want to hear candor. There's just no way to do that. There's no way for me to do it. Maybe there's some way for other people to do it, but there's really no way, you know, for folks, me to say, listen, I'm going to speak to you honestly and you should want to listen. I can't affect that. I can't really affect that. And as a writer, you know, to be honest, it's quite corrupting to try to affect it. You know, because then, you know, you find yourself halting, you know, how you speak, you find yourself adjusting things, you find yourself pulling punches for fear of, you know, scaring people off. And then you do a disservice to people who actually don't want it that way, who actually want you to be honest with them and want you to be straight with them. So I don't know. I wish more people listen. I hope more people listen. A lot of people did buy this book, though, you know, so, I mean, it doesn't really make the case for less candor. So.
Good evening, Mr. Coates. My name is Charles C. Welcome to town again. As a young man growing up, I was one of the kids who played kick the can. So when you said we just kicked the can on down the road, that resonated with me right away. I understand something about kicking the can. The game is just about over. Everybody's gathered. You kick the can, everybody runs, and you start all over again. As an African American that's been involved in the criminal justice system for 42 years, I think I've been involved in some kicking the can. Given the sophisticated analysis that you shared with us about the intertwining of systems, and in order to deal effectively, you got to go down layer after layer after layer. I think folks get involved in, it's much easier to kick the can in hopes that future generations will deal with it, while I can successfully deal with that issue that is before me right now. Maybe I can get a law changed, or I can make things just a little bit better in hopes that future generations will deal with it. So I'm part of that kicking the can, you know, down the future generations. How do we get at that? We look at the overwhelming task of trying to untie those systems that work so intricately together before we can really make any substantial change. How do we get at that and we quit kicking the can on down the road?
You know what, if one had the perspective that you offered here, if one said, listen, if one were able to honestly look at the system and say, listen, we're in a bad place here, but this is all I can do in my generation, I think that would be a step forward. That'd be a real step, but that's not what people say. What they say is we are in this revolutionary moment. We really say, I think we can get this fixed. This is huge. We're going to like they overstate what they're capable of doing and thus understate the problem. You know, I'm going to say something really horrible here, very, very depressing. Don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. I mean, listen, my biggest like bugaboo on this is like when we talk about criminal justice and we focus on nonviolent drug offenders. And here's why. It's not like I don't think it's not like I don't think we over-prosecute nonviolent drug offenders. We do. It's not like I think sentences aren't too long for nonviolent drug offenders. They are. But the fact of the matter is, when you start looking at the state system, something like 52% of folks in prison are there for what we classify as violent crimes. Those are facts. I mean, we have to have conversations about that. So when you hear politicians stand up and say, listen, we can clear the prisons out by just, dealing with these folks who are arrested on the corner for smoking marijuana. I mean, they are deeply, deeply understating the political problem of decarcerating in this country. Because what you need to do is you have to be able to say, listen, even for, say, murder, for instance, the United States is way out of whack when you compare it to other countries in the world. It just is. It just is. The way we dole out life sentences, the way we dole out double life without parole, it's just way, way, way out of whack. But that's very, very hard to say to people. It's very, very hard to say. This guy who shot somebody's kid should not have their life taken away from him. Because we have, in our mind, even though we don't say this, we've decided on retribution. I mean, that's part of what we decided the justice system is supposed to do. It's supposed to dole out revenge. The question then one has to ask is that the best thing for a society? Is that actually a good, that may make you feel good. Is that actually a good idea for the world that you want your kids and your grandkids to build? So, listen, it wouldn't be so bad if we said, this is going to take a long time to fix. And we're just doing the little bit we can do right now. I think it's the Pollyannish aspect of it. It does not honestly and directly convey to folks how deep the problem is. That to me, if we could just speak honestly, and say, listen, it's going to be hard. This was always my thing with reparations. People would say to me, well, what if we can't pay it all back? Well, then say that. Say that. Calculate it up and say, listen, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I really am. I recognize I owe this to you. I'm going to do the best I can to make it right, but I don't think I can get this one all right. I'm just so sorry. Folks would hear that. That's a good faith, but see what you get instead is, I don't owe you nothing. I ain't never did nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? There's a kind of denialism. And so I think if we were just a little bit more forthright about how deep we were. And again, I hate to go back to this, but I think the mirror for this is, what's happening with the environment. You know what I mean? Where you have a major political party in this country whose position is, it's not even happening. It's not even happening. It's a great, great danger to our society, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, good evening. So I remember being a young girl and listening to hip hop, and it changed my life. I remember, Tupac records and Nas records, and when the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out, and Anita Baker's Rapture and Sade's Love Deluxe. It was just incredible. And one of my escapes growing up was going to the library, so I started to read. And I just want to let you know how grateful I am and my extended community for the work that you're doing on an artistic and quite revolutionary front for many of us who have become disempowered over time, frustrated at the work that we do, both private and public, the grassroots level, the corporate level. We are angry, we are frustrated, we are tired. And so you kind of embody that same power that I felt the same time I heard Illmatic, and that same power that I felt the first time I heard Headless Heroes of the Apocalypse. I want to say thank you, and that's why I'm here. I also have a question really quick. I'm really humble, man. The work is dope. is crazy.
You got to get to your question. Though,
Okay,
because
I'm
we're
getting to my
almost out of time.
question. I'm getting to
Okay.
my question. So you've been quite clear about your where you stand as far as your religious perspectives. Like you don't subscribe to any major religion, and I just want to know if at all has your spiritual vibration or your perspective changed since the success of the book? Are you looking at the world differently? I know there's a lot of humility that comes with it. So where are you today spiritually?
Well, not yet. The book is, there's a heavy strain of atheism in the book. That's the perspective that the book comes from, and I haven't changed on that. It would be very hard for me to write what I wrote, I think, with the presence of religion in my life. Because one of the things about Between the World and Me is it argues for the preciousness and the individuality of your physical body. That the destruction of your physical body is in fact a great, great, great crime. And I think, and I don't want to overstate this, but I think that one way that black folks have dealt with that, one way black folks have, kept on is to think, okay, but what lives beyond that? What do we have that's bigger than that? Because we can't really control our bodies. What do we have? What can we, look to that's bigger than that? But one of the arguments in Between the World and Me is that what if there's nothing? Like, what if that's just it? And I have to tell you that's where a great deal of the desperation comes from. That's where a great deal of my anger, about the killing of Prince Jones, who's the guy I was talking about at the beginning of the book. That's where that comes from. It's just my perspective.
Kind of hot. We are out of time for the official hour of the program. If you're willing to take a few more questions.
Yes, I'll take a few more questions.
Okay. Well, before we do though, for the purposes of the recording, we're going to ask Michael to come back up and officially close it out, and then we'll take some more questions.
Right.
Okay. Michael Wilson, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been enjoying a special City Club event presented in partnership with Cleveland State University and produced in partnership with Ideal Stream. Thank you, Mr. Coates, and thank you, Mr. Mothrop. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is now adjourned.